friends, and welcome to the Future of Gaming. You're listening to our weekly FOGcast. We're recording this the week after GDC. I'm still recovering from COVID that I got at GDC, so if you were there with me at our meetup on Thursday and you have COVID now, I'm very sorry. We've got one of our usual co-hosts, Devin Becker, and then we have a very special guest, Ake Andre, who's the CEO and founder at Web3 Games. How is that pronunciation?
It's pretty good, actually.
Yeah? Better than I can
Okay.
Ake. Yeah. Anyway, so today our main topics, because we end up not really knowing where we end up, are KYC and AML for Web3 games, and also VAT for Web3 gaming companies. Ake has some relevant experience there, but he's not a lawyer. None of us are. So do not take anything here as legal advice. It is purely informative and entertainment, or entertaining,
like
hopefully entertaining. And it should guide you in I guess like how to approach this. Fantastic. So you will know Devin, you will know me, but Ake, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and maybe also like 2 minutes about what you're building?
Okay. Ake Andre, I'm 43, based here in Sweden. So, shortly, like my background, like, yes, gamer, done stuff in the gaming sphere, but I think for this particular topic, my background has also touched running companies in the online gambling vertical, and also been in the fintech segment, running companies there as strategic advisors to some of the biggest payment companies in Europe, like PayOn, Worldline, and as a strategic advisor in navigating the high-risk verticals for fintech, and high-risk verticals would be like the online gambling segment, or like fintech also looks at crypto as something that is high risk, right? And it's really there that you learn KYC, AML, like where things can really go wrong. So that's why they also need strategic advisors from people who knows the industry and to guide them. So that's my background, and what we're building at Web3 Games is an action RPG game, traditional action RPG game, in the same vein as a merge between Diablo and Path of Exile, but we were using the blockchain in a more sensible way, I guess, on mechanics that are proven. So like on the seasonal, in these games tends to have like a seasonal resets, and so what we're doing is that some of these like Web2 items can be then crafted into Web3 items, and then players can choose if they want to trade them or not, or they're being carried over to the next season. So it's we're not forcing our players to use the blockchain side. It's very much like optional. Otherwise, yes, focus on the game, and hopefully they think it's enjoyable. Yeah.
Awesome. Then let's dive straight in. Ake, could you maybe start with like a brief explanation of what KYC stands for and what it is? Same for AML, and then I guess talk us through your journey from starting Web3 Games and how you're thinking about complying with all relevant regulations in bringing it to market.
So KYC stands for Know Your Customer, and I think it's easy for me to describe this from an online gambling casino perspective. And then I think we can follow that red thread into what we're doing today. So in a casino, if you're doing an online casino, you need to know who your customer is, because when you deposit the money into a casino, it's to make sure that you can follow if this person have gambling addiction, which is kind of important. Like that here in Europe, there's also rules and regulation like that you need to be able to lock yourself out. Like I don't want to gamble anymore, then you need to be lock yourself out from all of these online casinos. So it's also like a help tool. And the second would be we need to know where the funds are coming from. In the early days of online gambling, people could just deposit money. And I don't know if you guys remember, like in the early 2000s, there's like this poker boom. Everyone was playing online poker. Well, that is all good and fun when you deposit money. But if we three are playing an online poker site, we're on the same table. I am a villain. I have some dirty money. And I make a deposit, and then I ship dump to Nico and to you, Devin. So we're spreading out like 10 grands. You get 5 grands each. I'm a horrible player. Now you guys withdraw it, and it's now in your bank account. That is a perfect way to launder money. Like it was never thought about that way when we started playing online poker, right? Like when you set up a poker site, and as an owner, you probably weren't thinking that people would use your product in such a way, right? So that's the reason why you need to know KYC on your customers, and that's where AML question comes in, like anti-money laundering. How do we prevent this? And if you have a product where that is online and where money can change hands between users, then you have a potential scenario of where money laundering could happen. And you need to then identify the sources of money coming into the site or your product and when they're leaving. So that's like a short and somewhat perhaps clunky explanation of KYC, but just trying to make it understandable for those listening. Now, when we started this journey of thinking like, okay, we want to build an action RPG game, everything would have been so easy if it didn't touch blockchain. Because there's proven framework how to do fiat monetization with, let's say you have V-Bucks, right? Or Robux. This is already proven. It's out there. It's you know the terms and agreement, and you can pretty much copycat what's out there from a legal side, and you're safe. Now,
could you elaborate on the exact mechanics, how that works, and then talk about how it's different now with the blockchain?
Well, if you look at something in gaming when it comes to you make a purchase with traditional fiat to let's say V-Bucks. There are several reasons to do that from a company perspective. One, if you have then you have one transaction that is going into the company in terms of profit, and when it comes to your VAT questions, because each transaction you have to actually declare, right? But then you're getting these credits that players can use inside your system. But inside your app or your game, these so-called credits are actually not owned by the user. There's actually owned by you're getting a license to use this credit from whoever owns the game, and so you can spend them inside the game, right? So in theory, actually, we have they have the right to just confiscate these credits, but it's to make sure that it's not considered to be a money transaction inside their app. So if you have a money transaction inside the app between users, then you're stepping into this world of problems with money laundering, right? And it's about simplifying these things, and I think you will see SEC in US started to like using this as something that they're pointing out that is happening in transaction for with this app using blockchain, and so that's what I mean. That if Epic are using this, and majority of the game industry are already using like this in-game currency, it's pretty much proven. Like, and that is like something that we know how it works. Problem starts when we start using tokens. Blockchain tokens, and that was one thing that we started to look at when we started this journey, like with my studio in 2020. The one thing we looked at was like, okay, we're going to build this game that we call Crystal Moons, and then it's like, if we know how to monetize on the fiat side, but on the blockchain side, how much can we allow inside the game without getting us into trouble? And we started actually communicating with the Financial Authority of Sweden. Many, I think many entrepreneurs are very afraid of when they hear the word financial authority. It sounds something that's very intimidating and scary. I am glad that I live in Sweden and that I do not live in the US, for example. The Financial Authority of Sweden are actually awesome. They're not unfriendly at all. They're not there to try to stifle innovation, and they're actually pretty experienced or knowledgeable about blockchain, and they just wanted to work without consumers being hurt, basically. So it was great to brainstorm with them to get some feedback, and the same thing with the tax authority. We had also some question regarding VAT questions when it came to NFTs and how to tackle them. But what we did identify is that we probably would be much safer, like if we didn't let the fiat economy like interfere with the Web3 economy, meaning that you cannot use fiat to purchase, let's say, an NFT in our game, or you cannot use something that is Web3 related, as let's say a token, to purchase something that you're buying with fiat. Don't let these two mix, basically. So you separate them completely. Because what happened then is that, and also don't, whatever you do, don't let a player be able to buy a token inside your game. Like if you look at something like, I guess Ake has always been a good example of, from a regulation standpoint, that's probably going to be a challenge. And that is like, if you let players find a token inside your game that has a monetary value on the outside, then it doesn't matter if it's just one token. You would be considered to be a virtual asset service provider.
So what determines the actual, whether or not it has a dollar value? Like if it's traded person to person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, you're able to get something with an Ake and that can leave Ake and be bought and sold. At what point, like, do they draw that line of, okay, there's a marketplace, therefore it now has a dollar value, or if it's peer-to-peer trading only, or if it's on exchange, like, how do you decide, like, this quote-unquote has a dollar value versus just, like, people are buying to each other? Things like that. That's what I'm curious about.
Very good question. And again, I don't have an exact answer for how they're thinking and seeing this. I think that will be more crystallized like further on. But it's from my interpretation, and this is my personal interpretation, like studying this, is that it tends to be as soon as there's like your token are on exchanges, and when you can actually trade it for in one way or another to fiat. that doesn't necessarily have to be the truth there. But my philosophy is that if you don't need to, and I would say that many games really don't need to. There's no reason for you to let players find tokens inside your game. Like, why go there? It feels like early on, I know, Nico, you love this word, GameFi. And
You're killing me, man.
yeah, but like those early wave was a lot about like trying to make people feel that they can make like an interest. Like it was so much focus on the earning side, so that was kind of like the reason why these mechanics were in place without thinking about the potential consequences. So that's I guess is where it all started and went wrong, I guess.
Yeah, it brings up just a lot of questions I feel like haven't really been clarified or answered, as you mentioned, around whether or not something has a value and how you assess that value, and like at what point it kind of crosses the line between being just a video game item to being like a digital asset, stuff like that. Like, for example, in the US, right? Like, I don't know how it is in other countries, but even barter is supposed to be taxed, right? As a transaction, even if it's just barter between two things and doesn't have like a dollar denominated value. And so it's like, then you have, I'm not sure if you just have to estimate the worth or whatever, but all these things are, you know, not necessarily buying and selling always with fiat, but if they're transacting in other things, like if I buy Ethereum and then I use that Ethereum to buy that thing, am I technically buying that thing in fiat? And all these kind of weird things where like things get abstracted out into these layers, and at some point, you know, the government obviously steps in depending on where you're at and decides this has a dollar value, that doesn't have a dollar value. And you talk about things like licensing and weird things. It's like makes me think of like if I buy a gift card from a company, right? Like a gift card is not really technically a dollar value anymore, right? Because it's only good within that company. Like I can only exchange it for goods within that like particular company, sort of like a license thing. And they have some rights around being able to like cancel gift cards and stuff. But I can also sell my gift card to someone else, like in the real world, right? And there's sites that just buy used gift cards and buy and sell them. And it's like, oh, does that then make it like outside the system and now a dollar value? And it's like anything that can leave a system can be tradable. And so that starts to really like blur a weird line, I think, in terms of what we determine has value and what is like taxable or has regulation around it. And I think this crypto space has actually kind of opened that up, that can of worms. I mean, you have the whole idea of like, oh, is art securities and all those other weird sort of questions that start to get asked more and more as well. And we start looking at like, what is this digital asset? Oh, it's just a piece of art, or it's something that works in a game, or all these things. And like, it makes me wonder then, like, was there, you know, as much regulation around, say, Diablo real money auction house items and stuff like that, where there was like the ability to transfer out, or even like Eve stuff where you can use Plex to sort of buy things, and there's like this weird half in the real world kind of stuff. It just seems like a real can of worms for governments to dive into at this point.
I had this interesting conversation with, I guess, like what's it called in English? But the division for future tech, let's call it that, at the Financial Authority here in Sweden, and the gentleman leading that division, where blockchain falls under. As he was saying, is that Financial Authority, they go in and regulate something when they see that the market itself isn't using some kind of best practice, or where they are not regulating the market themselves. They, like the Financial Authority, don't want to go in and regulate if they don't need to. They want to stay the hell away from it, basically. But when they see that there's like a lot of people getting scammed, or there's, you know, issues happening, then they step in. So I think there's probably like more areas where, like, to your point there, Devin, where like the Financial Authority actually could step in, but they are rather stay in the background and let the market try to figure it out themselves before having to go in. That's my take on it. Yeah.
It seems like in the U.S. we definitely have some interest, I think, from like Gensler in stepping in, at least from the SEC perspective, things like that. I mean, I'm not sure how it is in other governments in terms of like how much they are kind of eager to get involved. But I feel like in the U.S., maybe it's just because of like as you said, the scams going on and other stuff where it's like a consumer protection kind of thing that they're starting to get more interested. And obviously it sucks. We can't self-regulate to the point where we don't need them to step in. But it definitely seems like, Gensler was just testifying, I think, yesterday, the day before, and saying a bunch of stuff around, wanting a bunch more money for enforcement and stuff like that, and wanting to enforce more because of like just the amount of scams and other things going on. Obviously, FTX was, I'm sure, a big trigger for that and big collapses like that. But the funny part is that FTX.US wasn't even actually like the one that kind of collapsed everything. So. It seems like it might be like a territory by territory thing. And then it's like, well, then how do we deal with that, like from a global perspective, if everyone's kind of treating these things differently? Like, do we need to be like, I know like in IP law, for example, we have a lot of treaties between countries to try and get everyone kind of on the same page of respecting intellectual property. Like, do we need to maybe do the same? Because maybe we didn't need to as much with a lot of other things that don't go cross borders as easily. But obviously with money suddenly being like, we have SWIFT and other things that regulate are regulated and controlled, and you do things where we like, cut countries off from it with sanctions and stuff. But this is, you almost have to regulate it in a different way. And like trying to get all the countries on board, especially now that we're going quote unquote to like this multipolar world where there's less cooperation between some of these. You've got like BRICS going on, and like just even the China, Russia, Iran thing where they say like, oh, these don't apply to us. Like, I wonder if we can even get to a point where regulation can be agreed upon globally enough that we don't end up with huge chunks of the world that work very differently, despite this being a very global technology.
Personally, I would say no.
No to what?
That we're going to have like one thing to rule them all, regulation going on. I don't think that will ever happen. Sorry to say, and I think that is an okay. That is what we went into on this project, a modular thinking, and having like the gambling approach from a company perspective. I will give you a clear example. Like, let's say in UK, you're not allowed to have auto spin. I think, if I remember it correctly, like in Germany, you cannot bet more than, I think it's like €1 per spin. There's certain, like, every jurisdiction have their own take on like this you can do, this you can't do, and so on and so on, which makes everything quite like a hassle if you want to capture like all of these markets. Sweden have their own regulation where it's like, okay, you cannot offer, if Nico starts playing at our site, like we cannot offer you like a reload bonus because that is like kind of like, I don't know, incentivizing gambling addiction, I guess. So what we're doing here is, and that's why it's also like why we separate in these like two economies, with the full understanding that in the MiCA regulation in Europe, we're probably going to be super fine. Everything that we read on the MiCA, like what we're doing with our game Crystal Nine Moons, is fine. Will it be fine in US? I have no idea. Like, it's so schizophrenic over there. But what we can do is like what we inside the company calls like maximum revenue exposure. We can still launch the game with just the fiat side and make earnings with traditional monetization of the game there. And then I wouldn't be surprised if there's certain things that they're going to make it so that we cannot be in certain countries with the allowing the players to connect the wallet and so on.
How are you going to check that, though? That's what I wonder. So, because like we go from you talk about gambling, right? And you've got like physical gambling. Okay, that's easy to regulate. It's within country or state borders, right? Like you could very easily do that in theory. Then you go to online, and it's like, okay, well, it's online websites, and like we'll just do geolocation stuff around IP addresses, and then people use VPNs to get around it and stuff like that. And then when you get to crypto and you're not even connecting via IPs necessarily all the time, it's like wallets and stuff like that. And you combine that with VPNs. And there's a lot. I mean, maybe this is where we start to kind of dive into the KYC AML stuff. But that's where I wonder, like, if you're trying to go, okay, well, we're trying to stay, to these countries' regulations, we want to expand to these other countries. When you're on the App Store, okay, that's like a little easier, right? Because you're just like, oh, I'm going to launch in these app stores, whatever. But if you're on the web or you're on other platforms that maybe don't have like some automatic like location restriction to the deployment platform, that seems like it's a big task for crypto games in general.
You kind of answered that question. but yes. So okay, there's a reason why we're working with Worldline. I mean, yes, I was a strategic advisor to Worldline, and I kind of have like a good insight in how they operate and how their like payment stack looks like, and how it actually helped the online gambling vertical, right? Where you can actually, I mean, you can block it on IP, right? You can block it on bin range on cards. Like there's like a whole bunch of ways to block something when you have all the data on a transaction level. But now we're talking on the fiat side, right? And as you just mentioned, the problem comes when you want to connect a wallet. And the only way that we have found right now to do that, I mean, you don't want to unnecessarily push KYC on somebody, right? And because it causes friction, and we want to remove as much friction as possible. But the reality be that it could probably look like that if you're going to connect a wallet to an app, then you need to do a KYC. I mean, like to just have a wallet, I don't see that to be a problem. It's the moment, like when you try to withdraw something or do something with the app, where it's like something that's being moved in terms of a value. It could be that's the intersection point where you need to do a KYC. Yeah.
I kind of wonder if we could have like a really simple, because obviously KYC gets pretty complicated, right? The amount of stuff that gets checked, stuff like that. I do wonder if there could be, say, a service provider that just really checks which country you're located in, maybe by an ID. Like they don't keep the ID information on files, so there's no risk of that leaking, but they do validate what country you live in. And then basically soulbound token that to the wallet, right? So it's like, okay, I've got essentially a digital ID from this company vouching that I live in this country, and therefore that like acts as your sort of ticket into services that allow people from that country, right? And then it applies that sort of regulation to you and stuff like that. Like, I mean, do you see some potential there, or is that like just not deep enough from a legal standpoint to start to allow some like to open up things a little bit more? Like, do you still have to do IP checking on that, all those other things? Or can you just say, okay, we can legally trust this other authority that's vouching for, your location?
Yeah. Again, I'm not legal. Nothing of this is legal advice, financial advice.
Definitely. I was just wondering if this is stuff that's like been kind of explored.
But here's the thing, and that is that at the end of the day, you want to be able to, I often say, like, you want to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, like, I've done everything I can in my power to lock a person. Like, let's talk about the US market, right? I've done everything in my power. I've even used like on the let's say that I'm working with somebody like Worldline and like, okay, when it comes to blocking a US citizen out, they are not allowed to even deposit or do something in my app. And then in the terms of agreement, obviously it states the same thing, that like you are not allowed to use this if you are from this country, breaking regulation if you're doing that. If you like Devin then uses a VPN and breaks into this and still manage to use the product, even though everything we tried, I mean, it's not your fault as a company, and I mean, you are like the villain, the user here, and I think that is what also authority looks like, or look into, like, are you doing everything you can to stop this? And it's like, yes, but still, you're still going to have these incidents, and it's also, and that is also why it's important that when you have something, if you're holding customers' money, let's say that you have a wallet and you have an app like that, I mean, then it's even more important that you're looking into prudential behavior or these things when it comes to countries that should be blocked for these transactions.
Do you think
So
this ends up being a big
I think
gate,
some
though?
of this is actually what?
Do you think this ends up being a big gate, though, for just playing games? Like I've suddenly got to do KYC, AML to, sorry, can't say the acronym, to just play a game and just spend money in it. Like I know there's like, you know, some level of identity, of course, to say buying in the App Store or something like that. But this seems like another level of like regulation and validation that you have to do just to let people spend some money in a game because suddenly you could take it out. Like, do you think that ends up being a little bit of a negative for players? Because, you know, we talk about Web3 wanting to be like a benefit for players, right? But you're also now like actually kind of bottlenecking your own funnel of players in because you're saying, sorry, like you can't really participate fully in this game because you're not willing to do like KYC, AML stuff. Or do you just like gate it on the way out? You say like, you can go ahead and spend money in here all you want, but if you want to extract stuff out, now you got to do the KYC, AML, like you know, the way, say some of these like Benji's Bananas, like, you know, you can participate and earn whatever tokens, but if you want to actually cash it out, you got to do the KYC, AML stuff. Like, is that kind of the approach you guys are taking then, to not stop people from getting into the game?
If you look at our game, we've always taken the standpoint that the entire game has to be playable for you without the blockchain side. You shouldn't be punished like severely for not using the blockchain side. Otherwise, it becomes a problem, in my opinion. But so for us, when it comes to if you think about it as a user, if you want to trade something on the outside, then you're incentivized because, like, I'll give you a great example. Path of Exile, Mirror Calandra. Let's say that has that drops and you want to trade it outside Path of Exile. I think it's like going at $180 for a Mirror Calandra or something. I don't know exactly. I was looking some weeks ago. And that is a pretty clunky journey to get that sold, to get some kind of cash from it. And not only is, I mean, it's also it's gray/black market, right? And there's so many people that have been scammed in this journey. Ask any player, if you take 100 player today, this is not just some legacy thing from like, you know, 10 years ago. Ask today, take 100 players, and then you look at like how many have actually like been scammed, like in this journey of trying to sell the item, and how much actually real money did they get. It's one thing that is, if you as a buyer buys at 180, don't think that you're going to get the $180 for it. That's far from it. It probably, you're lucky if you get like 120, right? So from a player perspective, that has a huge incentive, right? To like, if I want to do it, and then it's such a much safer thing to happen on the secondary market, to do it with blockchain, much less like no middleman as such, and it's easier and faster. So that's what we see is like, okay, here it makes sense, and help these players. But one thing that I believe is that in the future, as we see this moving forward, like you are being KYC'd, I would say, like we take our fiat transaction for granted, how it's being processed. I think very few people actually knows, like at when they're being KYC'd in some of these transactions, because I mean, first and foremost, you go to your bank, you get your card, so you have an account, right? And so you have been KYC, like the bank knows who you are, and then you have this transaction. And then you have 3D secure transactions to further like confirm it if you like to, it's like this two-factor authentication that is like, is this really Nico or Devin or Ake doing the transaction? So it's like, I think like this is a process that is very smooth for us. Well, smooth, it can always be better, but I think the many consumers, they don't have a problem with it. Did our like, I remember like my grandparents, they refused to use cards. like that was so scammy and was so clunky according to them. I mean, just look at how payment with cards were in the beginning of 2000. It was super clunky. Like, but we forgot about that. Like, we've forgotten that journey, and we just look at where we are right now. It's so simple, it's so easy how we pay with
really
card.
On ramps, right? Like, so like MoonPay and stuff and ramps, stuff like that. You're going through that clunky process again. Like, I mean, once you do it, like, you can kind of stick with it, right? But they can't just like have your bank vouch for you and be cool. You've got to go through like the whole identity verification and all that stuff. And then it's like, oh, if a different on ramp provider is used by a different game, I've got to go through that again. Some of them may have problems. Some people, like, for example, have trouble with their skin color with the camera, can't verify, and like all those kinds of problems that come with it. Like, it's definitely not smooth if you're trying to on ramp. It's like even something like Coinbase or something like that, they can be pretty restrictive, and you have a lot of problems because like that's the problem right now is banks aren't on ramps, right? I can't just use my card and do anything in crypto, pretty much. Like, it all has to go through some kind of other provider or some other thing because the bank itself doesn't participate in that in general, right? I mean, maybe there's banks that I don't know if that do actually participate in that. Maybe that's what Signature Bank was doing before they got shut down. I don't know. But that seems like a big gap right there then. Like, in going back to what you're saying about kind of clunky cards and stuff like that, like, then we are kind of still in that when it comes to bridging that gap. Like, do we get past that point to where we're all KYC'd and then it's fine again?
I 100% agree, and there is also another reason why I think it's like, and that is also another reason why we're using this dual methods, like fiat and the Web3 approach with our game. We do see also in the industry like those established like. You see the initiatives from Visa and MasterCard and how they're looking at a blockchain. And the same thing with Worldline. Those that has the technology to improve and help fiat on-ramp. They are looking at this. They know that this is something that like this friction needs to be solved. And blockchain is not going away. I'm pleased to see that these kind of players are also like at consensus next month. It's in April, right? That they have presence. Like more of these like old established fintech companies are starting to get presence there and trying to figure this out and to solve these things. So I think that like in 5 years' time or something like that, you will see like huge improvement in this. And where like this clunkiness in terms of like, because there has to be some kind of partnership is perhaps like the wrong word, but like they're working together. The old established payments and regulation if they wanted to use this technology. And I think they are in agreement that they want to use it. Like, why would I otherwise spend so much money on it? So I think it's a question, like it's a question of time.
Do you think if we had like a fully regulated stablecoin or something like that, that it would be easier than for banks to be part of that, where a bank knows, okay, this is always going to be costing the same amount, it's regulated, it's backed up, it's not going to be like Tether or one of these other ones where it's kind of sketchy, then therefore we can essentially transfer value onto the blockchain relatively securely. We're following the regulation. Like, do you think that would smooth things out in terms of banks being able to deal with this? Because obviously it's a little weird, right? When you're like, hey, bank, can you buy some crypto for me? Right. And then it's like, well, who are they buying it from? Where are they buying it from? Whereas like, you know, something like USDC, right, tried to deal with banks. And obviously that had its own issues with banks, as we saw with SVB, right, where like the collateral could potentially, you know, run into problems and stuff like that. But do you think that sort of thing helps facilitate that, or that maybe that isn't a factor?
I think yes, and I think that's exactly what the our industry, like the Web3 industry, don't want to have. I mean, if you think about it, like this in Sweden, you have you call it the e-crown, Swedish e-crown that they're looking into, right? And I think that our industry, like, okay, I shouldn't say our industry, but I think if you look at where crypto came from, like this decentralized, like everybody is their own bank and everything is decentralized. I don't see that ever happening, because all the endpoints are centralized, and we have to play ball. We have to accept that fact. And then, like the products in the middle, those can be decentralized. And there's several like amazing use cases. And I often, when people ask me about like blockchain and so like how I look at it, I try to explain it like when I grew up, I had on TV, the TV tableau. Like if there was a specific show I wanted to see when I was a kid, I needed to catch that or record it on my VCR, right? Nowadays, it's TV on demand, Netflix. So we decentralize how we consume TV. And my kids look at me like, Dad, your childhood sucked. Like, it's like horrible. So I think these things are... We're like, yes, there's a lot of decentralization that is positive, but like these things like CBDC, like e-crown or like those things could probably help. But I also see that like the old school crypto fan base fear this.
I guess even more reason why banks would like it then, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we definitely have had problems with decentralization, like the mixers getting blocked, right? Where they just were straight up like, hey, this is not allowed anymore, proving like even decentralization has choke points. I definitely see us like getting in situations like that where this whole money situation of transferring money onto and off of the internet essentially becomes, a problem. But I think also like we have an interesting thing going on with the world economy right now where say, for example, the dollar suddenly is falling out of favor and all of a sudden we've got different competing things for the reserve currency. Maybe that opens up the sort of potential more for more currencies to be in the mix that might be digital or might have other value. Like that's what you see, for example, people flooding to say Bitcoin, right, when the banks are getting unstable, or the things where we go, well, where do we put our money if, say, the dollar isn't the reserve currency anymore? Do we then start putting our money in other countries' currencies? Do we put it in digital currencies? And I think it starts to open up more possibilities, but also like maybe a little more infighting between countries over these regulations and like having to create more choke points between them and stuff like that. And I got to imagine that's going to get messy for games, kind of bringing it back to the games here, like to make that work, right? Like suddenly maybe your game suddenly has to adopt all these other different cryptocurrencies for its exchange just to be able to get in and out. Like the way a game that wants to accept fiat payments from different countries has to do with all these different payment gateways, right? And like obviously mobile app stores made that a little easier where you're like, oh, let Apple or Google deal with that, right? Like I don't have to have like, Stripe and BitPay and all these other like 10 million other like things there as an option, right? Because maybe PayPal isn't universal or all those things where it's super scattered. Do we end up back in that point with crypto because like, oh, this country isn't allowing this particular token to be used there, and so I can't use it in my game. If I want people from that country to play, I have to use this token. And maybe that's a central bank token because maybe China says, yeah, you can have crypto games, but you have to use our central bank digital yuan in your games and stuff like that. Like that seems like it could get pretty messy.
But there's another part that I think is overseen, and that is the VAT question.
Yeah.
Like with everything you just said, and then we just stop and we look at VAT. What many like are forgetting is that if you sell NFTs, like I'll give you an example here, like and a huge shout out to Ebba Thieding, the CFO at God, what's the name? Completely brain melt here. It's an L1. Maybe it comes back to me. But there's a few cool people in this industry that are actually trying to do right, and and we're here before our company, and it's like we're coming together, try to figure things out together. Chromaway, for God's sake, Chromia. Now they're also based, have an office in Sweden here, Stockholm. And when you start in this journey, like I had so many questions. And as an entrepreneur, like I'm always stunned by some entrepreneurs who are completely like they don't even care about the law. Like they just go. I wish I were the kind of person that could just shut my eyes and run, but then you're probably going to end up in an orange jumpsuit.
We do that a lot in the US.
Yeah,
We're just
yeah.
like disrupting, right?
Yeah.
We're just jumping straight to working.
But the reality is that like so many entrepreneurs that want to touch this, like they have sleepless nights. And I actually had I created like this meetup in Sweden with some other entrepreneurs touching this technology. And just at the dinner, I asked like, please raise your hand. Whoever had like kind of like this fetus position in your sofa, like a sleepless night, wonder like, what the hell have I gotten myself into? There's like this unknown question mark that could potentially be like has very serious legal consequences for your company, and especially for you as the owner of the company. I mean, like you have to pay attention to these things. So we started to work together and tackle these questions, and I learned a lot to other people that had been in this for me, and we could like put our brains together. And we identify also like the problem with VAT. So like we started communicating with the tax authority of Sweden, and where it's like obvious that like if you sell NFTs from like your web page, like your homepage, then you're selling it, then you should report each of these sales. And in Sweden, like that is 25% VAT on each of these sales, right? And if Devin, let's say Nico is buying from Holland, then it should be reported to something called one-stop shop. In European Union, you have like a centralized where you should report this VAT, where it should be going. So that's like another question mark, right? And outside of European Union, there shouldn't be a VAT. So like the only thing we could just come up to, and when we started talking with the tax authorities, like, okay, so let's say that I sell for 1 million USD. 1 million USD, and that means that I should pay like 250K in VAT, right? But we don't know where all of these sales are coming from. Like, and now how do we go about and report the correct VAT amount to the tax authority? So it's like, so then I asked them like, what if I pay you max VAT? In theory, like I should probably not pay you 250K, but that's not how much we know that we have sold for. But we're just going to pay you maximum. And they were dumbstruck at the other end of this conversation. It's like, so you want to pay more VAT than you actually need to just to be on the safe side? I'm like, yeah, because have I actually done anything wrong then? Can you come and punish me for that? and they pretty much are like, well, that works, I guess.
So for the US people, like you want to explain how value-added tax works? Because like here in the US, we just have like the sales tax, and it's like enforced like I think state to state, and like so how does VAT work in general, like in Europe and all that stuff?
How it works?
Yeah, like it just applies. Like, is it just like a percentage of every transaction as a tax, like a flat tax? Is it per country?
Yeah, it's different based on different goods. So, like certain things, there's 12%. I think art is falling under 12%, and then the majority of things in Sweden falls with 25%. Like
6% and 21% in Belgium. So. This is just a better place to live, I guess.
Yeah. Better beer.
A better place to buy from then.
Yeah. No, but so it's like so in Sweden. So then you have digital goods, and the thing is, I think many are also looking at this from the perspective of like how. And then the question is like marketplaces, like for example, like OpenSea. The one thing that many of these marketplaces, I think, are potentially going to set them up in having issues is because like it doesn't matter whatever you write in your terms and agreement if you're trying to like this, because many of these terms and agreement that they're writing is like, okay, we are not responsible for VAT, etc. Like from whoever is using this this platform, it's all on the end user's responsibility. Well, the thing is that you cannot in an agreement, write yourself free from the law, right? It is like saying that in Sweden, I write in my terms of agreement that I should never pay VAT ever, and it's a civil agreement between me and you, Devin. You have a company here. It's like I don't need to pay VAT, and we have an agreement on that. Like the tax authority is going to come and say like, well, okay, this looks nice, and then they're going to wipe their ass with that paper and throw it out the window. It's like, no, it doesn't work like this, guys. So like tax law is, it's not the same as civil law. So that means that I'm wondering what's going to happen with these marketplaces, because one thing that is, when you're selling your digital goods for a game on a centralized marketplace like App Store, it's not your responsibility as a game studio to report VAT. That is up to the App Store in this case, right? And that's actually something that's being tested now with marketplaces. It's like if I'm selling my items on a marketplace, then isn't that a centralized place where it's being sold, even if we in our world look at it as a decentralized marketplace? There's some interesting questions happening on VAT when it comes to these marketplaces.
Quick question on that then. So when VAT is determined, is it the country that you're buying from, or the person buying it where their country is? Like, which country is applying the VAT?
So it's where the buyer is coming from.
Okay. Cool.
Good. We covered a shit ton of ground. I feel like there probably could exist a podcast series that is only talking about this stuff. I feel like there's still a bunch to be told. Okay, I'd like to have from you a maybe final couple of tips for Web3 game founders out there, like your most important tips, how to approach everything that we discussed just now.
Wow. Don't be a wild cowboy. I mean, seriously, like, be cautious. But like, don't be over cautious that you're paralyzed. I think that just having like this mindset that not everything will be decentralized is a good way to think about this, and also to have like a modular thinking about how you're building your games. Try to think about it's nothing wrong to having a backup monetization that is proven, which is fiat. And if things apply in the real world as in normal games, who have to pay VAT and think about these things, like just because you're using something on the blockchain side doesn't mean that you're exempted from the law. Like there's a lot of industries where you can look at that has kind of like paved like somewhat of a framework that you can be within, and that's why we looked at online gambling. We're not, I mean, obviously our game is not gambling, but I think it's something that is under the financial authority supervision, and has still been able to work on a global scale. I think it's a good thing to look at how they've been navigating a market that is moving from unregulated to regulated and trying to learn something from there. And I also think that don't be afraid to reach out to other founders that is doing this journey, because most of us are actually just nice guys trying to to build something and gladly share knowledge. That is actually one of the reasons why I'm thinking about setting up an incubator here in Umeå for other game studios that wants to try out using this technology, and where we can help each other and learn and share the blueprint of things that works and doesn't work.
Do you
financial regulators are less scary than they seem.
Oh yeah, like
at least in Sweden.
Yeah, I mean, like both tax authority and financial authority, like don't be afraid of them. Like they're not there to nail your ass to the ground. It's like they do want to help.
They want you to make money so they can tax you.
Right.
Of course. Legit. Yeah.
All right.
Want to play ball.
Fantastic. Okay, this was great. Very insightful. Love that you're focusing so much on this. I think there's still many open questions, because this problem is not going to go away. Let's see how this moves forward. And I respect that you're erring on the side of caution. You're not being a cowboy. Pretty sure that in a few years we'll look back and say like, Okay, he was onto something when a bunch of games are being shut down. So appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure being here. Nico, Devin, awesome.
Devin, thank you. And listener, thank you too. If you enjoyed, let us know. If you have questions for Ake, he's in our Discord, so just come and ping him. And if you think this deserves more, then also let us know. We can probably dig in and get some other people's thoughts as well. Right, with that, we're out. Speak to you next week. Ciao.
Ciao.